All right, so hey Peter, hello.
Hi, how are you? Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you as well. Where are you calling from?
Hell's Kitchen. I've been
All right.
here all of quarantine. Where are you?
Yeah, I'm up in Inwood and
Inwood.
same.
And yeah, it's lovely to like meet other stage management connection. I was curious like how you identify with disability and stage management, or what is your story? Maybe just start off with that.
Yeah, it's kind of a very much a developing thing for me. Um, the two threads of it, one of it, the stage management thread. I first got into stage management when I was in undergrad. I'd always been performing on stage
Hmm.
prior to that. And then I went to Williams College where they have a J-term course in January where you just can take one class and sort of try different things outside of what would be normal
Hmm.
academic or beyond. Some of them are normal academic classes, but a 1 month stage management course was offered. So I took that and was like, oh, I kind of like this. I'm pretty good at that. And then I did not get cast into the next show that I auditioned for the department. Um, and so on the little form that says, if you are not cast in the show, are you willing to do, wardrobe, backstage, etc. And so I did stage manage, and so I decided to do stage management then. And I loved it, and it went really well. And in the linear version of the story, that would be when I decided that I was going to be a stage manager. But I decided actually that because I got no sleep, my grades went in the toilet, etc. I'm like, all right, that was fun. Not doing that ever again. Um, until like a couple semesters later when a professor in the department asked me if I would stage manage the show he was doing, and it turns out that I'm extremely susceptible to flattery and feeling needed. Um, so that got me back into stage management for the rest of college. And then I was still like, I'm going to get a real job, and that was fun, but now it's real world time. But I graduated into the 2007 wonderful economy.
Hmm.
And so I worked, actually, the job I ended up getting at that point was as a music director and pipe organist at a church. I don't know how real job that qualifies as. But while I was doing that, I realized there were, despite all of the on paper overlap between the jobs, I wasn't happy with it. And so I said, if there's ever a time to give this a try, it's now. And so did a few years of interning. And then since I'd never actually studied stage management formally, I went to grad school and came to New York after that. So what's sort of the overlapping thread of that is also while I was in undergrad, I've had issues with chronic pain my entire life, like since I was little kid, and never any diagnosis, explanation, or help, really.
Hmm.
Lots of it's in your head or eat a banana, it's growing pains, and all of that when I was a kid. And then on top of that, when I was an undergrad, it's college. You have all these kids around who are like not getting sleep, whatever. And I got sick a lot, like flu, sinus infections, all of that. But at some point, about halfway through, like during my junior year, I got sick, and whatever it was, like just knocked my body just entirely off its axis. To what, in hindsight now, with it being more prevalent and also just more on the internet, uh, really kind of lines up with what's now described as post-viral syndrome. So basically, I was just, sleeping 10 to 14 hours per day, the pain was worse than ever, could barely drag myself anywhere. Cognitive function was like down here. And I think that was when, and that went on for a couple years. It wasn't like, oh, it's a slow recovery, but it was multiple years.
Hmm.
Um, and that's when it first entered my head as I was graduating from college. somehow in that state of health, where I'm just like, am I ever going to be able to function in the world in the way that I had envisioned myself as a person who functions in the world? And part of what helped is the music job that I got. It was a part-time job. I'm lucky enough to have a very supportive family. And so I was able to really, and also with the fact that it happened when I graduated from college, which is, sort of, accepted, or, like, oh, they're just getting on their feet right now. Sure. Like they'll live at home for a little while. And that really allowed me to take a very long recovery. And combination of both time and also just, it's this sort of double-edged, two sides of the coin, double-edged sword side of the thing. The fact that I was hit so severely and in such bad condition just sort of lit the fire under my butt. Like, what can I do? What can I do to control this or make it better? Is there any way of doing that? Because all the doctors, all the blood, that was no help. And I've managed, and I'm always a little bit hesitant to talk about this because it's I don't want anyone to seize upon this in the whole do yoga and you'll get better sort of thing. But I am fortunate enough that I have been able to manage a lot of my symptoms through figuring out what works for my body and basically shaping my life around what can keep me as healthy and physically functional as possible. And also then the flip side of that, I had it recently, even though I'm fortunate enough, it's chronic, it's in that it's ongoing, but now it's intermittent when I have a flare up. But so then also when that happens, my first thought is oh God, what did I do? What did I not do that let this slip through the crack, or let myself let that happen to me? And it's really, in a way, and that all sort of slowly braided itself together, and that it's really only over the past few years, as I've made my way through my professional career as a stage manager, and also had the opportunity to be exposed to and listen to more disabled voices in general, and then also work with people in the professional sphere, that I've had this sort of exploratory discovery journey myself of what it means for me, because I just felt people, I just have to deal with this thing that I can or can't control, and I never really considered myself as having a real disability or anything like that. But it has been over recent years that I felt more of an affinity towards that.
Do you talk to your directors or your production team or your cast and the colleagues when you start a production? Do you talk about it, that these might be some things that come up for me, or just so if this happens? Do you have those kind of conversations, or do you just push through?
It started back especially early career was just push through at all costs, which I think is something that's an issue I feel with stage managers in general for anything. But I also, it's something, also a recent development. Last year was the first year that I got a cane, because sometimes the flare-up gives me difficulty with walking. And that's, also has the fact of being sort of an easy in or easy opener. If I just walk in early and be hey, sometimes I need this. And it helps it both be, sort of steady and normalized. And also an incident that I went through last summer has sort of spurred me on to being more proactive
Mm-hmm.
about that, which also in turn has, made me be like, does this apply, am I part of this? Does this apply to me? And that I showed up to a theater to work there over the summer. I see a kitty cat tail.
Sorry, there might be
No apologies.
Yeah.
Hello.
It's Prinza. Hi.
What's her name?
A Prinza.
Hello. But I showed up to a theater and like lovely, absolutely lovely company, lovely people. But I got there and the only way to access the control booth, the stage manager's booth, was by ship ladder. And I said like, oh, no one told me about this. I'm in a different state now. So just FYI, this might not be a thing. Hopefully it won't be a thing, but there's a possibility that's non-zero that this might be a major obstacle for me at some point. Which, having now encountered that, I'm just like, oh, this really needs to be something that I can be upfront about, that is not only just standing up for myself, it's also for the sake of the production, and also for anyone, if it's not something they've thought about, for anyone who might come after me. And so, yeah, it's really been a journey for me that's has been really sort of gelling over the past few years. How about yourself? What is your story, your journey?
Yeah, I mean, there's similar themes, but in differences too. So I have cerebral palsy. I was brought up and like born and been told like just to say you have a stroke and just say you have minor CP and don't talk about it. And basically the essence of my upbringing and just like what I was supposed to do is try to be as normal as possible and don't let your disability show. And it's not that big, it's not that bad, it's like minor, right? So you don't like, I'm not in a wheelchair, nobody really has to see it. Only when I'm tired will like my speech get slurred or someone might notice something, but don't, just make sure you work hard as you can and make sure that nobody sees it. So that's been sort of my philosophy, I guess, through life, and it's gotten me quite far. But definitely a few years ago, with hearing more disabled voices and seeing more disabled stories being told on stage, and reading articles, some by even Greg and Magzala and Katie Sullivan, I credit them a lot with my awakening and kind of like, what the hell, Peter? Like, what are you doing? Did I sort of like question, and I was like, why am I not talking about this? Like, what were like the problems or challenges in the past that have gone that were there that maybe weren't my fault, or maybe they could have been, there was something else going on there. So I trained like to be a performer, very similar to you. I was at an opera and just trying to have many different avenues to be a part of the performing arts community. And in college, there was an opportunity to take a stage management class where I could go in to see theater class. I was like, I go to see theater all the time. And my advisor was like, you need to take this. I was like, okay. But I took it, and like the production manager was like, don't judge it while you're in it. Like, wait till you're at the end of it. And in the beginning of it, I was just like, I hate this. This is terrible. This is awful.
Why would anyone want to do this?
And yeah. And by the end of it, like, I loved the relationship I developed with the director and the cast, and being there for all of the production and seeing all the pieces come together, as I'm sure most stage, seems like a common theme with stage managers. And I was like, by the end of it, I was like, what can I do next? So I got like my first pick of like the next show, and I did Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, which developed my love of Tennessee Williams, which I relate to a lot of his work. And then I was the production stage manager for the theater festival for like my final year. And then I just started looking for avenues, and I worked my way up into equity. I'm from the Bay Area, so I just came to New York about 6 years ago. And I worked in the regional theaters there. And then like a year or two before that I was there, it was like work was it was a little bit difficult to put together a full season of work, and there were some experiences I had that did not necessarily go very well, and that's one thing that I've like looked back on in this awakening too. What were all the factors? And so I came to New York, and I was originally coming here to actually like go in administrative theater direction, and I went to TCG and started as part of the development as a development intern, and I tried a few other administrative theater roles at Theater Works USA as a development person. I went to the public and was helping out in the executive office for a little bit, and then I was like, around the election, as part of the awakening too, it was around disability, and it was like, what the hell, Peter, you need to be part of the production. Like, what are you doing with your, like, this is not like, maybe I can make the world a better place, and I really, as a stage manager. And so it's sort of been this journey of now figuring out what awakening of myself and what that means, and like how to use my voice to kind of make positive change in the world, and what has happened. So in this awakening too, like I did not talk about my disability at all before like 2017, and would just like, if there was problems, like we'd deal with them. I was just like, Peter, you need to try harder, or of course, like, you should have done better, like, or you don't really have a voice, like that's how they do it, like that's their other style, and you're not as experienced, where you're just not trying hard enough, like of course it was your fault, and always that like guilt and shame around that. And coming into my own and being aware of it, of my disability, and just trying it out and being like, I think this is what I need, or this is what might happen, has been a big journey. So my first like out experience as a stage manager was at Oregon Shakespeare Festival in 2018, and just trying that out. And there were some things, it was like really empowering to start off and talk about my disability, and say what I might need, or what comes up for me, or how I would like to work. But I also was like trying it out. And it wasn't really like, and the thing with me is that sometimes it might not be exact, like I don't need help all the time moving something, where I don't always need help with somebody with like aphasia doesn't kick in all the time, like where it might not be consistent like accommodations or help that I need, where like it's different on day to day. So it's been interesting coming into my own about that. And then this last year before the quarantine, I started working at Blue Man Group, and that was really that was really cool, because I felt like I was at a different stage in acceptance and being able to talk about what I need. And I have a history of epilepsy, so we figured out a way, and there's a part of the show where there's strobe lights, and so I figured out I flipped down an eye patch just during that moment. And it's mostly a safety thing. I've not had a seizure in a very long time, but I need to be aware of that. And also doing key lights, I'm left-hand dominant, so I only type one-handed. So key lights and how it's set up in that tiny booth is a little bit of a challenging, and I got a different stool so I could sit and like swerve around. And it was wonderful, because like I came out of it like, and of course at my interviews they're like, oh yeah, that's fine, it's not a problem. And I was like, yeah, but we need to talk about it, like I think it's better. And so it's interesting going through that process, and then training on the show. Like there's some, I guess they're microaggressions. Like one of the stage managers was still like, oh, like telling me like the first week, like, oh yeah, I was one of the fastest to like learn the show. So just like, and just like little things, like, I'm like, why is that helpful? She's like, and there was very confusion too between because all the stage managers sort of help you. And so like one of them would be like, oh my God, I wish you were so much further along. And then the next day I'd be talking to the other stage managers. She's like, I'm really happy with where you are. Like the one that I really appreciated. And so it's very interesting, like seeing the dynamics and like just like a stage management team of like how different people view your situation. And of course it comes with different personalities and all those things, but it was still interesting. I was just like, and I've been thinking a lot about that. Like obviously I don't see very much disability representation. I have not seen it at all on Broadway or anything else. And like, why is that? And what are the like superpowers and things that they're missing that could make, if they actually had more of our voices and gave us a place and didn't look at it as like something you need to get overcome, or they're just doing us a favor or doing me a favor. And are all the things that like a stage manager is supposed to do, like our little like job profiles, is that really what we have to be doing? Is there that whole thing about style, I think is really interesting, because I've been thinking a lot about that just as my little rambling. And it's like, we have a conversation usually with stage managers or with the group, like how do you like to do that? And so until like the last few years. I was like, well, I don't think I should really be on book. Like, that's a little bit of a challenge. And definitely, like, if I'm sending off a big email to people, those are kind of like, I should make sure someone reads it before I send it off at the end of the night. Like, those are like two like main things I'm pretty sure I need to make sure are checked, or at least aware, people are aware of, because there might be like something way off, and it's just because of the facial, like I could literally be reading it and it would show up.
And I feel like that's one of the things that, it's, you know, you don't always get it with a, you know, if you're doing a super tiny production, but you know, if you begin moving to medium size and larger, often stage managers, you know, we're working in it as a team. And I feel like there's a real room to take advantage of the fact that we do have a team of people, and that there is some porousness between who's doing what and like what strengths are people. And that's, and when you were mentioning that last part, it made me think of, you know, the huge debates within the online stage management community, by which I mean Facebook, about, you know, do we make an official stage management job description, and do we list specific tasks? You know, on the one hand, that can be a tool to, you know, a protective tool, by saying like, well, this is actually not on it, so you really shouldn't be like having me take out the garbage or whatever. But on the other hand, you know, it changes so much what a stage manager does from project to project, and what's necessary, and which also means that you can have stage managers that, you know, a group that are all on a super high caliber, and some will be correct for some projects and some will be correct for others. It doesn't mean that they're better or worse, but, you know, certain stage managers fit better with certain projects and what's demands of it. And I feel like one of the, you know, one of the arguments against delineating everything is that isn't making it too rigid, which also I feel like has the potential of locking people out unnecessarily. Like, would that mean that the, you know, theater that I ended up in, someone to be like, you know, the stage manager must be able to climb ladder, which doesn't, you know, make them a better or worse stage manager. But like, if you begin like delineating tasks, it's like, who's to say if that's actually what we need from a stage manager, or if it's unnecessarily like locking people out.
Yeah. Yeah, I've seen like that was like a lot of some stage manager positions that like ask for all that stuff, which is the argument too. I'm like, that shouldn't even be a stage manager position, but they're just trying to get more out of you. And I was like, I wouldn't really want to work with that group of people anyways. Like, for me, that's just like, because I'm like, I probably wouldn't be able to stage manage. And I'm like, really, if you consider like, what do you think a stage manager does? And like, I guess that should be okay. Like, obviously, like some people are qualified and they want to do that. And I think that's just like, it's been interesting, like, as my reflection in the last few years too, because I was like, there's certain people that like I locked on and I was like, oh yeah, we're like a team, and like, you want that team. And so like, just looking at from that respect, like stage managers and like, they find their team and like their ASM or their PSM that they like to work with, where you find your theater where you know how that works, and each production is different. So it's all that, but there's also all that flexibility of like, how do you make things work? It's fine.
Thank you. I actually was really curious with one of the sort of prompt questions that Greg had shared with us about working with integrated casts of both, you know, deaf, disabled and non-disabled theater workers, and you said that we both have experience with that. Could you tell me about what your experience has been like?
Well, the most recent thing was working on Every Link a Heart Does Dingle at the Lark with Madison. That's like and well, actually no. And then I also did like the Emerging Writers Group series. So I did Ryan Haddad's. I was part of the state management team for that, for the development of that. And then, and I did a dance show that Madison was in too. And what else? I'm just like listing my things that I could call on so I can talk about. And then I had Monique Holt, who is a deaf actor at Oregon Shakespeare Festival. Right now, I'm in the second semester of learning ASL, which I found. So, but I think what I've learned, just like as a basic, where I find a kinship because there's obviously a personal understanding that I have. Like I want to make sure that like the actors that I work with have what they need and have what they want. And I've in certain instances, I think that I don't know if all actors or even performers or disabled people in theater are. I wonder if they're always like asking for what they need or want or feel like they're empowered to do that. So I feel like I want to make sure, but I also don't want to be like bugging and prodding. So I know like with Every Link of Hardness Dingle, like I knew who Madison was. I like respected her. I got to see her on Broadway. I actually thought I was sort of like, oh, how do I make sure that like I connect with you and like we have respect, but like those first interactions, it's like, how do you make sure that you're getting what you want? Where once we're like moving into rehearsal, I want to make sure that you get what you want. And it was at the Lark is not like a huge amount of production elements, but it's still like you're going to be doing a play that's 3 hours long. Like, what do you need? Do you need anything? Just make sure that you can talk to me. I will want to make sure, like, so don't feel shy. Like,
I feel like that's hopefully going into hopefully it's like getting support also from what I feel is a larger positive trend, or at least desire of like seeing the whole person as they come into the room. It's not just like, it's, you know, sort of stepping away from the whole, like, you know, leave everything outside of the door, like just, you know, get in here, like do the work and that's it. But it's a recognition of how a person exists as a whole person in the world, and that their life outside of the room is, you know, it's, you know, the same thing that gives, we can't ask both for everything that their life outside of the room gives us as far as their strength and creativity and experience, and disregard, you know, other aspects of it that might seem less convenient for, like that it takes you X amount of time to get from A to B, you know, point A to point B, which might be a different amount of time than it takes another person. And that we're, you know, that we, yeah, that basically that we have to see the whole person if we want to be able to work with, you know, full artistic honesty and integrity with them. And you know, one of the things that I also was thinking about that I feel like ties in with that is the issue of production timeline. And that I feel like, you know, it's always a little bit of a crash course, because, you know, as a stage manager, you know, if you're deeply involved personally, like with a specific company or production team, like you might be involved or heard or like dealing with it earlier on. But a lot of the times, you're kind of brought in when a lot of stuff has been in motion already, as far as both you know, on the hiring and on like the human resources and HR end, but also on the like, this is what we have designed and like things that are already built and we've already spent money and planned whatever. But there, you know, there is planning that it's just like, well, it's just taking into consideration. I'm thinking back to, I think Monique Holt was actually involved in a panel with deaf artists that I watched, and they talked about something that lined up with my experience, my two main experiences, which one for Colored Girls at the Public this past winter, where we had Alexandria Wales was our Lady in Purple, and then also doing Teenage Dick, which starring Greg, And we also, and Shannon DeVito was also our buck in that. And it was, you know, a high school version of Richard III, commissioned by the Apothetae and presented by Mayi Theater at the public. But just in, you know, considering the full sum of the humans that you're bringing in to work on this project, some of those things require a lot of advance planning, like, you know, hiring the full schedule of interpreters that you need, or, you know, what needs to be built into the set so that people can physically access it. And that, you know, hopefully that's something that theaters are, you know, thinking about beforehand when they're looking to draw from these artists. But then, you know, it's sometimes a little bit, you know, crash course stage management, and they're like this, and oh yeah, this, you know, we have this disabled artist, and then you kind of have to, you know, very quickly think of, like, try and search for any red flags or anything that needs to be addressed as quickly as possible before you even interact with the person for the first time.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think like time is like the most like the biggest barrier or the biggest challenge, whatever, like, to, and I think it's the sense of feeling, I think that's why this is like a stage that right now is like the theater community, and a lot of people probably need to have more experience or vocabulary or thinking about how disability involves in that. It's not all just because you've worked with one disabled person too that you know all the answers, and for each production it's going to be different. And how do you actually figure out your production schedule? So maybe you actually need a different amount of rehearsal weeks, or actually maybe you should have a longer planning period that's considered that. And like, what are all the different options? Like, is there just like that standard practice of like, we just do our table work, we have the staging week, we have tech, and then we're up? Like, does that work all the time?
Yeah, and that does, man, flexibility and schedules. It seems like almost a little bit of irony that I feel like almost, you know, theaters and organizations that it kind of is like tipping this. You can only, it's like you can only have one, but like it feels like the more resources you get, also sometimes the less flexibility you have, because often more resources means, you know, you're dealing with a bigger organization or institution, which means that, you know, you're trying to jigsaw in like 25 productions in a year, and this, you know, if this one thing changes, that has a domino effect on like knocking down all these other things, which can, you know, reduce the amount of flexibility that's available as, you know, we're trying to maximize or like optimize what we can do with all of these resources, you know, all of these resources. And it's like, oh, how do we, you know, like, yeah, how do we bring things back into balance with that?
But yeah, that's why there's like, it always feels like with all the conversations around disability, there's never like, oh, okay, we've had this conversation and there's like a clear answer to any of these conversations where like, this is exactly what needs to be done. Like, it doesn't work that way. I think that's what is the most interesting and most annoying and the most challenging part about talking about disability and representation, and having each of our voices whole, like, heard and experienced, and treat everybody with the same, because it's not just cut and dry.
I feel like I'm seeing kind of a divergence, in that I'm definitely seeing everyone is talking about this time of pause and theaters being closed as leading to potential change. I see different stories being told through actions from different individuals and groups. And I feel like, you know, one of the things is that I do recognize that, to use one of the words that 2020 has destroyed, that some are in a position to be more nimble than others as far as changing the way that things are going, that for some it is a much bigger change and it brings much more risk to enact change and to step away from business as usual. Again, like if you have this, you know, if you already have all these things on your plate and like a domino effect could be setting things off, that's a much bigger risk to make a change than if you're, you know, tiny theater companies like, all right, you know, might as well, we're going to do this, and, you know, and we have, you know, all of our resources are held here, right here in our two hands. And it has been interesting to see who has already started taking concrete action, and witnessable action, then also come down to all the rest of us, whoever that is, and how we then choose to react to and interact with these people, organizations, entities, and how they are that, and how they've responded to say, like, oh, I want to be a part of that, or I don't want to be a part of that, or, you know, oh, that seems like they haven't gotten there yet, but there's like potential, so I'll get in, maybe like I can push from the inside now and do something there. And it has, having been involved in some conversations, it also has been interesting in some places where, you know, there's been, people have been less than satisfied with what they've been seeing from the larger structures, but there are still people inside of them who are feeling energized and who are taking that. So, you know, I feel like we need to watch, and also on the one hand, but I think both hold people in general accountable, but also not write, you know, not immediately just write something or somebody off if we don't see the change immediately, because there might be things happening inside that we aren't seeing yet. So I think a balance between accountability and giving support to those who are making the changes and improvements now, while still being like, all right, we're not gonna vibe with that right now, but we're still looking forward to when you hop on board.
You know, I mean, Brene Brown told us recently, is like, we're in day 2 of this quarantine, and it's like, so there's like that, and that's like the hardest part, and like there's definitely, and like there's this initial part, and like I've had like the stage of my first part of quarantine being like, I'm gonna do every webinar, I'm gonna get all my skills, I'm gonna take all this on, and there's like, you know, all the reckoning that we've had with us as individuals and with the outer. And I've been happy and like appreciative of some of those awakenings, and surprised that some people that hadn't even been on a journey that I thought some of us were, have been surprised, or I'm curious about the different ways that some people have had awakenings and taken action and thought more and like moved on. And then I'm curious about what this day 2 is, because I feel like there's some roadblock too, which I'm still like hopeful that there'll be like actual change, and that like theater will like have incremental change when we come back, and that we'll have these conversations and will matter. But I'm also curious about that actually happening, because I still see like a block too at this point. Like there's some people that have had initial conversations and voices that have been uplifted, but they also haven't. I would like to see more of an expansiveness of that.
And now it's just started over the past couple of weeks that I've started to be doing more long-term virtual theater work, and that it feels it's given sort of a rhythm flow timeline for me of sort of stepping out of the, you know, oh, we're in a pause, like we're dealing with the pandemic, and like do what you can. Now it's just like, all right, now it's sort of back to the new normal. We're just like, all right, yep, we're doing virtual theater right now. We're working on the Zoom. And which is, yeah, it's sort of fun. It hit me. I was surprised by the way that hit me. And, you know, it's sort of wondering now also for myself, like what, you know, it is a different work environment, and in some ways a more accessible work environment, in other ways, depending on your situation, you know, some people's situation, it's a less accessible, equitable, you know, environment. And so things that, you know, now that we're settling in, that all right, we're going to be here, it's trying to navigate what it means that this is okay, this is going to be our work environment for now. And then there's the question of once we get, as you mentioned, like the reopening and like getting back to it, you know, what of all of this might stay, like what might continue, out of what developed during the pause of conventional theater when that begins to reopen, and that's a great curiosity for me. And what of all that has developed during this time, what of it is just a stopgap measure, what of it is, it's like, oh, we think let's keep that. What, from the listeners at home, what do you hope stays? Like, I feel like geography means an entirely different thing now, both in terms of, being who we're able to work with and how. It's not, I don't have, I'm, remembering I've had, well, thinking back to Teenage Dick and Shannon, was, I think, coming in from Philadelphia for rehearsals to New York City. And, to think that to save an amazing performer like her from all of that travel, like, and still be able to work together, or, I can collaborate with someone on the other side of the planet, like time zone coordinating notwithstanding, and that's just as normal right now because we're in the same spaces, us within the same city. It looks the same. And so it's, I think it would be geographical possibilities that opens up, is something that I hope can stay, both on the artistic side of things, collaborators, and also like it's on the audience side of things. It's exciting to be like, someone can watch something happening live of, who normally would not be able to access it just because they live 6 hours away. So I find that very exciting. And, and also for me, like, I've greatly appreciated, thinking back to, the past couple, the week where it's like, it would have been a huge chore for me to get to work on this day when I just spent like, 2 hours literally lying on the floor because I'm too exhausted to try and pick myself up off of it. But, my computer is just over there. I can manage getting myself over there to have a Zoom planning call. And that's just as normal now as the expectation of what used to be the expectation of, well, we're going to meet in person, right? And so, that has in some cases made things a lot more manageable for me. Peter, what's been your experience with some of the things brought on by our current situation?
Well, so for me, at that week of the closure, I was working at Blue Man Group. I was trained to do front of house for Blue Man Group, so I was on that process. And then I was most likely going to be a house manager for Playwrights Realm, that would start in like a week. So I was like, okay, I've got lots of work done. And I was at my temporary receptionist job at Blue School, which is like the elementary school down, like on that Thursday, and I was sitting behind there and I was watching the news come in. I was like, oh, Broadway closed. And so I was like, okay, so all of my work is gone, and they're all part-time. I mean, it's all part-time work. I'm a regular employee of Blue Man Group, so I have a very low, but basically I was like, oh, I got it, my schedule kind of set and like work situated for a little while.
Right.
Yep. And so I felt like there was just obviously a lot of energy that goes into just getting around to those places. And so I've thought a lot about that. I've been like, part of the reason why I have like the apartment in Midtown is just because like it's a way that makes me navigate the city in a way that I can. I've tried living in Inwood, like the first year I was here, and I was at the Public, and there was like the day that the month that like the A train doesn't work and it takes like 2 hours to get there and back, and I'm like, I can't do this. I can't manage my energy. And related to that, it's like that the amount of rest you need, I think if you have different compromises, you need that time to rest. And so like if it also takes me longer to do something, or maybe it takes a different timeline to like learn something, that also means I also need rest, which is, I think, going back to that time, I think I'm just like cluing back into that. It's and so I think that the idea of using Zoom is really great in certain respects, because it can open up a lot of time that maybe you wouldn't have if you could avoid having to travel anywhere and do that aspect. And I hope that there becomes a lot of flexibility in that. And I think I hope Hamilton has inspired people to look at the many options that you could actually start off, like, why can't we stream more theater or experiences ahead of time? Like if a theater is not accessible, we're built that way right now, and it's like a historic building that you can't see why it can't, isn't there a stream option available regularly just as a standard? And if that's also a way that, so I think that accessibility and different options, I hope that there's more variety in what's available depending on the companies and just how they work with it. I have not gotten to actually Zoom a show yet or experience yet. But I also know somebody where I was connected to somebody who did a bunch of Zoom work during the summer, and actually her main theater is now trying to open up because they're in a different state, and they're trying to do this, going back into the world. And actually she can't work because she has, she's in a family full of people with immune compromisation and herself. And so she actually feels like she can't do it now. So she's out of work where she's actually had a bunch of work during this first part of quarantine because she was doing a bunch of things. So it's interesting now to see that. And I hope that it's interesting on that respect though, because I don't understand, like, isn't there some flexibility still in like maybe how you could still work, learning these seeing that we can do these different opportunities of managing shows or being a part of it.
Just end up with a wider range
of
what we can do.
Yeah. But I do know that it is really important. I definitely miss like being in a group of people, because like that is something that you do need, is that energy. So, but there should still, I hope that I don't know how that works. Like there was a flexibility of like, sometimes some people, if you're not feeling well, like, is that a standard practice? Like you can actually just Zoom into rehearsal today. And of course there might be differences if you're like staging in a staging rehearsal, that might be a problem. But also if someone's really sick that one day, maybe they can still get the blocking, like having an assistant or something stand in, and they are learning and they can engage with the material. Like I wonder if that's an aspect, and if that's also some way for some people to manage a rehearsal process, or even a tech day. Could someone Zoom part of a tech day, just so that they see like where the lights are, but they don't need to be in the theater for 12 hours a day or 10 hours a day.
If we become more discerning and in the neutral positive sense, like discriminating and being like, what do you actually need to be here for? And to really just be respectful of that time and energy and that of physical presence. Because there are definitely things that it's necessary for. There are some things that are like, maybe not, and especially if the trade-offs. And also when you mentioning about someone being sick, and that maybe another thing that I wondered about coming out of this is the culture of like, oh, you're not feeling well, but like come in. But now with everyone having disease and sickness on the mind, like, are we going to have more respect for health in general? Just being like, no, if you're not feeling well, don't drag yourself in, because there are other ways, there are other methods and there are avenues available, and that we are giving a priority to health and well-being.
But yeah, I think it's just like, I think it's more of like the question where just like, I hope like everyone, like people, like where we all just consider like the different ways that we can use ourselves and other stage managers. Like I hope the theater community will start experimenting or open up their mind of what they think a stage manager has to be, or how those teams are built, or what is what is expected. And so I think it's that interesting thing of like not putting in like a full job description of this is what you have to do each time, but also having that conversation. Like we're like when people post a position we're talking about, we'd like to look for a stage manager that can fill the show, and these are things that we're thinking about, but we're open to have a conversation with you and actually come from it like an open space. Like we'd like to build like a really team, because we're looking for develop a supportive environment while we're developing the show. So if there's some way in actually job descriptions to leave it more open instead of being like, you're this thing, you're this, and having that be open and actually appreciated, and people are looking for that, is to hear a new voice or to hear of a new way of stage managing. Because I think it opens up actually how we produce theater, what is actually having that sense of openness. So.
And I feel like also two things that struck me, and that one, it seemed to tie into the value that we've touched on earlier of just having conversations from as early a point as possible, and the value of that. But also it just made me think about, you know, and until the point that the job descriptions do open up that conversation, like for people not to, you know, notice the red flags when they're there, but also just to not discount yourself, or not to pre-disqualify yourself from something just because, you know, they have, you know, you don't see the opening written in for you yet. They might, you know, it might not be there yet, but it might actually exist if you go for it, and it might lead to that then being more open in the future.
Yeah, and own your story. So I think like that's important. If it doesn't even work too, I think like that's what there's sort of a barrier to. It's like, oh, if I say this, like I might miss out on something, but it's actually just important. Like trust. That's why I sort of trust myself. I'm like, if it doesn't actually work, it's probably not the right time. But actually, I need to keep on being clear about what I see and what I want. And like, it's the right time when it's the right time. And if you're meant to be here and to be doing this and to be a part of the theater community, find your path. And of course, part of the beauty of theater is that we're supposed to be keeping on searching for the new experience and the new openness and the new way of doing something. And so if we keep that instead of limiting ourselves, the world is our oyster, or I don't know.
Yes, I love oysters.